Remember the end of section 130 of the Doctrine and Covenants, where Joseph Smith clarifies that, yes, Father and Son are corporeal, they're bodily, physical resurrection. But the Spirit is not like them in that way. The Spirit does not have a body of flesh and bone. It's a personage of Spirit so that the Spirit can dwell within us. And so to understand that reality, another comforter that can abide with us forever, that's incredible. Constant companionship is the ideal. But notice what he says in the middle there. The world can't receive it. And he's going to talk more and more about the world and what it can and cannot do. But why can't the world receive the Spirit? Notice what he said. Because it seeth him not, neither knoweth him. This is where epistemology comes in. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. How do we know what we say we know? And sadly, since the Enlightenment era, the world has limited its epistemology until it is stiflingly narrow. You thought the Lord had a narrow way. Well, the world's way of knowing things is so narrow, it's almost a straitjacket. It's empirical. It must be scientifically provable. If you can't see it or weigh it or measure it in some way, well, how do you measure infinity? There's no microscope that can see small enough to discern spirit. That's finer stuff. And there's no telescope that can see far enough to detect the ends of our existence. Oh, God is infinite. The atonement is infinite and eternal. And there's no mortal measurements that can encompass all of that. We have to be able to be willing to break beyond the world's narrow epistemological model and say there are truths that I cannot see. Even science has to admit some things you can't see either, at least not with the human eye. We've got a pretty narrow ability to discern things. We can see from red to violet. But what about infrared and ultraviolet? You're going to need different instruments to detect that part of the spectrum. And for us to discern spiritual things, it will have to be done spiritually. If we refuse that, because I can't see it and I can't know it along those lines, then, oh, so sorry. There's things that you'll never see then, and things that you'll never know. As Elder Packer used to say, if the only things you know are because of things that you can see or hear or touch, then sadly, you don't know much. And to see the things that the Lord will show us, to feel the things, to taste, that's a sense that the Lord often speaks about. Alma 32, right? To taste this light, to partake of the fruit of the tree of life from Lehi's dream, for example, 1 Nephi 8. So many examples where that's the sense that we use. Well, the beauty of tasting things is it, as an analogy, you have to experience it. Because I can't describe taste. I might be able to describe things I see or hear, but tasting, that's almost impossible if you haven't experienced it for yourself. Well, the Lord wants us to experience it, and we'll experience it through the Spirit. And the beauty of the Spirit, one last thing to say here, is you have to be worthy of His companionship. Imagine, see, this to me is, speaking of epistemology, and how do we know, and what sense will we use? The power of the spiritual sense is that it's so sensitive, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And that lets us know our own role in things. So many scientific measuring instruments are so separate from the individual scientist using them that they always work, or they always don't, depending on what they're trying to measure. It's independent of the user. So user error is not what we're worried about here. Well, sometimes that's an issue in science too. But think about that in terms of the Liahona. In the Book of Mormon, the Liahona was an amazing instrument, right? It guided, it directed. In some ways, it was a spirit of truth that pointed them in the true way through the wilderness. But what was amazing about it is sometimes it didn't work, because sometimes its user was guilty of user error, or in this case, user unworthiness. Can you imagine if scientific instruments only worked based on the worthiness of their operator? And worthiness meaning, why are you doing this? Is this for a noble purpose? Are you selfless in your approach to science? Are you trying to achieve a greater good? If so, then your telescope will work, your microscope will function, your particle accelerator will do all that you designed it to do. But if you are using science in such a way that it will hurt and harm more than help, then it's not going to work. I won't let it. Can you imagine that? Imagine if every scientific instrument functioned along the lines of the Liahona. To make it even more personal for us non-scientists, what about your senses? Can you imagine if they only worked if you were using them for the kinds of purposes God would want you to? Imagine if your eyes stopped seeing if you were trying to look at things you shouldn't. Imagine if your ears suddenly went deaf if you were trying to listen in on conversations to a negative end. Can you imagine that? That would be wild. In some ways, it would wake us up and let us know if we were using them for their proper purposes or not. Where it's like, well, why did I just go blind? Oh, why? Okay, now I have to, Lord, is it I? And I have to purify my motives, and why am I trying to use this instrument? Is it to live the first and second great commandment? Is it to love God and bless neighbor? I guess it wasn't. Then how do I purify my motives? To me, and again, this goes back to people who I'm working with, or people that are knee deep or in over their heads in anti-Mormonism, especially when it's disseminated by ex-Latter-day Saints. Number one, do they even believe in God anymore? If not, that's a different premise that they're operating from. Number two, do they still believe that there's any kind of spiritual means of acquiring truth? Because again, if that's a no, then that's kind of a non-starter, at least for now. Then how am I supposed to answer your questions if you won't even allow for that possibility? What's their epistemological model otherwise? See, to me what's interesting is you don't have to be living a certain way to fall prey to anti-Mormonism. You don't have to be living a certain way to fall for falsehood, to start accepting counterfeit currency. Then again, to find truth, you've got to be living a certain way, or your sense doesn't work. Your eyes can't see, your ears can't hear. No wonder Jesus so often said, those that have eyes to see, let them see. Those that have ears to hear, let them hear. If you got a heart to feel, then feel. Open yourself to the Spirit. It's a fascinating epistemology. And in some ways, what I love about it is it doesn't only let us know about some outward object. Is it true or not? It tells me about my inner attributes. Am I true or not? Am I living my life in such a way that I am in tune with truth? Living in such a way that this comforter can be a constant companion. There's something powerful here, and it will become more and more important. It already is essential, but it will become even more so to live worthy of that comforting companion so that we can discern truth from error. To think about, speaking of counterfeits and falsehood, I just stumbled across a YouTube channel that is President Russell M. Nelson in artificial intelligence. And they're trying to create falsehood. They're trying to create angels of darkness disguised as an angel of light. And what can we get President Nelson to say in hopes that people will fall for it, hook, line, and sinker? The technology isn't quite there yet, but it seems that it's only a matter of time. And how well will we be able to discern? As President Nelson has said, we will not survive spiritually if we don't have the Holy Ghost with us. Spiritual survival, it's gotten to that level. And so this other comforter that the world can't receive because it's outside its parameters, nope, I can't see it, I can't know it, then forget it. I won't accept this. Okay, then get ready to fall prey to a world of falsehoods. Whereas those that are willing to show their love to God by keeping His commandments and live worthy of the constant companionship of the Holy Ghost, they will be able to discern, because this Spirit is the Spirit of truth. And truth will come shining through.